Clara Dawson had imagined the West 100 different ways, but never like this, never with her cheek pressed against the cold, dust-choked earth, the taste of blood in her mouth, and the sky spinning above her in a dizzy blur of orange and gold. She had thought her journey would end at a church altar, not in a lonely stretch of desert road where even the coyotes hesitated to linger. Her wagon had broken. A wheel just past Apache Wash, and the driver, eager to reach town before nightfall, had abandoned her with a hurried warning. "Stay close, ma'am. Don't wander." He left her beside her trunk, promising to return with help. He never came back. Instead, 3 masked outlaws rode out of the settling dusk, dust kicking up behind them like angry spirits. They believed she carried gold mail-order brides, often traveled with dowries, sometimes small fortunes. But Clara had nothing. She was the poorest kind of bride, one who carried only hope, desperation, and a faded locket with her mother's picture. When she told them she had no money, they didn't believe her. When she begged them to search her trunk, they laughed. And when she swore before God she had nothing to steal, their leader dismounted and struck her so hard she collapsed at the side of the road. The world became fists, boots, shouts. Her own pulse roaring in her ears. Someone tore the locket from her neck. Someone else kicked her ribs until she couldn't breathe. They left her bleeding, half-conscious, promising she wouldn't survive the night even if the desert spared her. She lay there for hours, maybe more. Time drifted in and out like a broken tide. The day cooled into evening, and the wind changed. Instead of blistering heat, she felt a creeping chill. Her thoughts turned soft and blurry. So this is how it ends. She had traveled nearly 1,000 miles to marry a man she had never met, a wealthy rancher who needed a wife and believed her letters painted her as gentle, obedient, grateful. Clara had hoped for a second chance at life, any life better than the harsh one she'd left behind. She had told herself even a cold husband was better than starvation, but now she would never reach him. Her life would end on a forgotten strip of land between nowhere and nothing. Her breathing grew shallow. Her eyes drifted shut. Then dash thunder. Not sky thunder. HOOFBEATS. Slow at first, distant, then closer. Closer still. A horse snorted, the sound sharp and alert. Someone dismounted. Boots soft, deliberate approached her. Clara tried to lift her head, but her neck refused. She squeezed her eyes open just enough to see a silhouette blocking out the last slant of sunlight. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, long hair tied behind him with leather. A dark silhouette against a burning sky. An Apache. Every warning she'd ever heard echoed through her mind, half-truths, fears whispered by travelers, superstitions painted as fact. But nothing in his stance felt threatening. His shadow lowered as he crouched beside her, his movements fluid, cautious. A warm hand touched her jaw, turning her face toward him. She flinched at the contact, pain slicing through her cheek. He said something in Apache, voice low and rough like desert stone. She didn't understand the words, but the tone gentle, steady, unraveled the tight knot in her chest. Her vision blurred again. She tried to speak, but only a weak breath escaped her lips. He lifted her with startling tenderness, as though she weighed nothing. His arms were strong, warm, solid, a living anchor in a world slowly slipping away. She felt herself pressed against a broad chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat thumped against her ear. She clung to that sound. The stranger wrapped his blanket around her, securing her like she mattered, like she was worth saving. Then he mounted his horse with her in his arms, holding her as if she might break if he loosened his grip even slightly. As darkness finally overtook her, Clara managed a faint whisper, half prayer, half disbelief. "Please, don't leave me here." The Apache warrior didn't understand her words, but he understood her fear, and he did the one thing no one else had done that day that he chose not to walk. Away. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness as the horse carried her deeper into the desert night. She didn't know where the Apache warrior was taking her, only that every sway of his horse pressed her closer into his chest, and every breath he exhaled warmed the top of her head. She had never been held like this, steady, protective, unwavering. The stranger rode with a purpose she couldn't name. His muscles tensed each time she moaned, as though her pain traveled directly into him. More than once he murmured something in his own language, words she didn't know but felt in her bones, soft, grounding, almost rhythmic. Like he was coaxing her to stay alive. The world around her blurred into shapes, towering cliffs, dark mesquite trees, the faint silver of moonlight on sand. She barely recognized anything until she smelled smoke, not fire, not danger. Campfire. The Apache slowed his horse and dismounted while still holding her. Only when his boots hit the ground did she realize how large he truly was, broad shoulders, strong arms, and a presence that commanded the space around him like he belonged to the land itself. He carried her to a shaded alcove near the base of a canyon wall where a small fire crackled low. A blanket was already spread there, along with a leather pouch and herbs. Someone lived here, or at least returned often enough to keep it prepared. He laid her gently on the blanket, his hands surprisingly careful for a warrior. When she winced, he paused, his dark eyes narrowing with concern. Even in the firelight, they glowed with intensity she had never seen in any man. He spoke again in Apache, slower this time, as if hoping she might somehow understand. She couldn't, but she managed to lift her hand, barely brushing the back of his fingers. "I don't want to die," she whispered. Her voice was nothing more than a cracked thread of air, yet he understood. His jaw tightened, and he reached for a water skin, pressing it to her lips. The first drop stung her dry throat like fire, but she forced herself to swallow. He nodded in approval. Then he tore strips from his own shirt, soft buckskin worn by years of sun and sand. He cleaned her bloody cheek, her split lip, the bruises on her ribs, all with a tenderness that stole her breath more than the wounds did. Her lashes fluttered. "Why? Why are you helping me?" She breathed out in confusion. He didn't respond in English. Instead, he pressed his palm lightly against her sternum, right where her heart beat faintly beneath the bruises. His touch wasn't improper. It was grounding, reassuring. Then he tapped his own chest. Slow and deliberate. Heart to heart, she thought hazily. He understands pain. When he removed his hand, he began carefully mixing herbs with water, creating a paste that smelled bitter and sharp. He spread it along her ribs with his fingertips, his brow furrowed with concentration. The sting made her gasp, and instantly, instinctively, his hand covered hers to steady her. He didn't release her until the pain eased. By the time he wrapped her wound, Clara was trembling, not just from fear or cold, but from the staggering realization that a man who owed her nothing was fighting harder for her life than anyone ever had, including the groom she had been traveling to marry. The Apache finally sat back on his heels, studying her with a gaze that saw too much: her exhaustion, her fear, her loneliness. She felt exposed, yet strangely safe under his eyes. What is your name?" she asked, forcing the words out. He paused, then touched his chest again. "Taza," he said. Slowly, clearly, his voice was deep, steadfast, rough like wind over stone, but gentle in a way that contradicted every frightening story she'd ever heard about Apache warriors. "Taza," she repeated, her voice softening. A flicker of warmth crossed his features, so subtle she might have imagined it. Then he wrapped another blanket around her shoulders and added more wood to the fire. The canyon glowed warm orange, chasing away the cold creeping into her bones. Taza didn't leave her side. Not even when night deepened. Not even when coyotes howled in the distance. He sat with his back straight, spear within reach, eyes scanning the darkness for threats. He stayed awake so she could sleep. Clara, fighting the pull of exhaustion, whispered her last question before sleep claimed her. You saved me. Why? Taza looked at her, expression unreadable, then lifted a hand and gently pushed a strand of hair from her swollen cheek. His reply came in a low murmur, words she didn't understand, but would later learn meant, because the Creator placed you in my path. And with that, the world finally went quiet. Clara surrendered to sleep in the arms of the one man she never expected to meet, the man who refused to walk away. Clara awoke to warmth, not the harsh, burning warmth of the Arizona sun, but the gentle, steady heat of a nearby fire. She blinked slowly, her lashes sticking together from dried tears and dust. For a disoriented moment, she didn't remember where she was. Only the scent of smoke, crushed sage, and leather filled her senses. Then she saw him. Taza sat with his back to her, sharpening a stone blade with deliberate, rhythmic movements. His long black hair fell past his shoulders, catching the orange flicker of the flames. His silhouette looked carved from the canyon itself, still, solid, unyielding. A protector, whether he wanted to be or not. Clara tried to sit up, wincing as pain sliced through her ribs. At the rustle of blankets, Taza turned immediately. His eyes softened when he saw her awake. "You're safe," she whispered to herself before she could stop the thought. He rose and moved to her side without hesitation, placing a steadying hand behind her back as she eased into a sitting position. The blanket slipped from her shoulder, and he gently pulled it back up, careful not to touch more of her than necessary. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the canyon floor, but its soft light revealed the place Taza had brought her to, a hidden hollow between towering red cliffs, sheltered from wind and unseen from the main trail. A spring trickled nearby, feeding a patch of green life in the otherwise unforgiving desert. It was beautiful, sacred, untouched. This place, she whispered, awe threading her voice. Taza looked out across the canyon, his expression unreadable. "Home," he said slowly, carefully choosing the English word. Clara swallowed. "Your home?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not home." Not exactly. Something in his eyes told her she stood in a place few outsiders had ever been allowed to see. With a gentleness that contradicted his rugged appearance, Taza handed her a clay cup of warm herbal tea. His fingers brushed hers, just barely. Heat rushed through her at the unexpected contact. She sipped and nearly choked. The taste was bitter enough to make her eyes water. He chuckled softly under his breath, the smallest, rarest curve of amusement touching his lips. It was the first time she'd heard anything like laughter from him, and the sound warmed her more than the tea. What is it?" she managed, wiping her tongue with the blanket. "Medicine," he said simply. Of course it was. Everything about him was purposeful, even the unpleasant things. When she had recovered, Clara studied him more closely. There were lines of exhaustion on his face, shadows beneath his eyes. Had he slept at all? "Taza," she said softly, "how long was I unconscious?" He considered the question, then showed 3 fingers. 3 hours? She guessed. He shook his head. 3 days? She whispered, shocked. He nodded. Clara single quotes S breath caught. 3 days. He had carried her here, tended to her wounds, and watched over her for 72 hours without knowing whether she would ever wake. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm a stranger to you." Taza's gaze dropped to the ground. For a moment, she thought he might ignore the question entirely. But instead, he reached for something at his side, a small beaded charm. Worn at the edges, its thread fraying. He held it gently in his palm. "My woman," he said in halting English, touching the charm softly. She die. Same road. Men heard her. His throat tightened visibly, and he pressed the charm to his chest. I not help. I come too late. The sorrow in his voice hit Clara like a blow. He had loved someone, and he had lost her violently. And now 3 years later, he had found Clara the same way. Taza, she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. He shook his head quickly, not wanting her pity. But she understood now. Saving her wasn't chance, it was redemption. She reached out, her hand trembling, and rested it lightly on the back of his. The gesture startled him. His muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. You didn't fail her, Clara said softly. You saved me. You saved someone. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she saw the crack beneath his calm exterior, a flicker of vulnerability. He allowed only because she was more broken than he was as the sun finally crept into the canyon, bathing them in gold. Clara realized something else. This man, this Apache warrior with a wounded heart, was the only reason she was alive. And this forbidden canyon, hidden from the world, was now the only place she felt safe. Days passed in the canyon, yet Clara hardly noticed. Time seemed suspended in that hidden hollow, where the wind whispered secrets through the red cliffs and the trickling spring sang lullabies only she could hear. Taza moved with purpose, and Clara slowly learned that every motion, every word or lack of one was deliberate. He never left her alone, never let her touch go unnoticed, never allowed her to feel unsafe. The first morning after she regained her strength, Taza taught her to ride. The horse, a chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its face, stamped impatiently as Taza guided her hands to the reins. Her legs trembled in the stirrups, but his voice, low and firm, reminded her to breathe, to trust. You're stronger than you know, he said. His accent made the words almost musical, and though she didn't understand all he said, the tone alone carried weight. Hours passed in a blur of motion and wind and laughter she hadn't realized she could make. When she fell, as she inevitably did, he caught her before she hit the ground. And when their hands brushed, she felt an electric shock that made her stomach twist in ways she didn't expect. She pulled away slightly, embarrassed, but he simply nodded once, as if to say, I understand. Evenings were the most dangerous because they were filled with longing she could not name. Around the fire, she watched him prepare food, his movements fluid and deliberate. The flickering flames cast shadows across his face, highlighting high cheekbones and the steady determination in his dark eyes. When he looked at her, it wasn't a glance, it was an assessment, a silent promise of protection, and an acknowledgement of her growing presence in his life. Clara caught herself lingering near him, finding excuses to adjust the fire, hand him water, or gather herbs together. Every touch became a small rebellion against the world that had tried to destroy her. Every shared glance felt like a whispered confession neither of them dared to voice. One evening, after a long day of riding and gathering, Clara sat too close to the fire and yawned. Taza glanced at her and let a rare smile flicker across his face, a brief, fleeting thing, gone almost as soon as it appeared. You need rest, he murmured in English, voice softer than she had ever heard it. I'm fine, she replied, but she didn't move. She didn't want to. He leaned back against the rock wall, careful not to crowd her, but the heat radiating from his body drew her closer anyway. She noticed the scent of him, then earth, sage, and something wild she could not name. The aroma made her pulse race. Her heart, still tender from the memory of the outlaw's attack, now fluttered for a completely different reason. You saved me, she whispered, almost to herself. I've never felt safer than when I'm with you. Taza's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time she saw something unguarded. He did not look away. He did not scoff. Instead, He regarded her with a quiet intensity that made her shiver. "Safe," he repeated slowly. "Yes." His voice was low, almost a growl, and it carried a weight she could feel pressing against her chest. "I protect." She swallowed, trying to steady her trembling. "It's more than that," she admitted. "I feel, I don't know, alive again. Like I'm meant to be here." He shifted slightly, the firelight glinting in his dark eyes. A tension settled in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. She realized then that their bond had already crossed lines neither could name. She wanted to reach out to him, to trace the sharp plane of his jaw, to feel his hands, not just on her for protection, but for connection. Taza's gaze fell to her hands, then back to her eyes, and Clara understood. He knew. He understood the pull between them, the dangerous attraction that could consume them both. And yet he made no move because he did not act without reason. That night, as she lay beneath the blankets, the fire crackling nearby, Clara stared at the shadows dancing across the canyon walls. She realized something undeniable. She was no longer the terrified bride left bleeding on the road. She was someone new, someone alive, protected, and perhaps most terrifying of all, falling in love with the Apache who had saved her life. The canyon, once merely a sanctuary, had become a crucible where a dangerous bond was being forged, and neither of them could ignore it. Clara's mornings in the canyon had become a quiet rhythm of healing and discovery. She and Taza had grown into an unspoken companionship, riding together, tending the fire, and learning the subtle ways of the land. But peace, like desert rain, was always fleeting. One afternoon, as she gathered wild herbs near the spring, she spotted a plume of dust rising on the distant trail. Her chest tightened. Riders, at least 3, moving fast. Not strangers, she realized. The dust carried a familiarity she couldn't ignore. Taza appeared silently behind her, his senses sharper than any horse or wind. He crouched beside her, eyes narrowing. "They come," he said simply. "No fear, just observation. They found me," Clara whispered, dread creeping into her voice. Her thoughts raced to the man she had been promised in marriage, the wealthy rancher who had arranged her journey. James Whitmore. He had been polite in letters, all charm and promises, but she knew the truth now. She had been little more than property to him. Taza studied the horizon. "Whitmore?" he asked, his tone calm but dangerous. Clara flinched. How could he know? He? She stammered, struggling to explain. "He paid for me. He thinks I'm his." Taza's jaw tightened. He didn't need more information. In his mind, the truth was clear. Clara was a woman threatened, a life endangered, and he would not allow her to be taken. Yet he did not speak of retaliation. He only moved silently, signaling her to follow him deeper into the canyon, to a place even more hidden than their usual camp. Hours passed. The riders circled, shouting her name, calling her bride, as though she were nothing more than a possession to be reclaimed. Clara's stomach churned with fear and anger. She realized that James Whitmore had not truly sought her out for love or even companionship. He wanted control, revenge for her absence, and perhaps a bitter pride bruised by her independence. Taza watched silently as the men's voices echoed off the cliffs. Then he began teaching Clara small lessons in survival, how to move without sound, how to hide her tracks, and how to stay calm when fear tried to overtake her. Each touch of his hand as he adjusted her grip on the saddle or guided her around a rock sent shivers through her, both from terror and something more primal. By nightfall, the attackers had retreated temporarily, frustrated by the canyon's natural defenses. But Clara's fear did not fade. She understood the stakes. Return to Whitmore, and she would be forced into a life of subjugation. remain with Taza, and she faced uncertainty in a world she barely understood, but also safety, and a growing, undeniable desire for the man who had saved her. Sitting by the fire that night, Clara dared to voice her anger. "I don't belong to him," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "He has no right to me to any of this." Taza's eyes glinted in the firelight, dark and fierce. "You belong to no one who would harm you," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Only those who protect. Only those who care." Her pulse raced. The fire, the danger, the isolation, it all drew them closer, binding them in ways neither dared to name. Clara realized that the same man who had healed her wounds, who had offered protection and trust, had also stirred something deeper, something she could not ignore. She was afraid of Whitmore. Yes, but more frighteningly, she was afraid of the growing feelings for Taza, feelings she had no right to indulge, yet could not deny doubt as she lay in the shadows that night, listening to the distant echoes of Whitmore's men and the wind through the canyon. Clara understood the truth. She had been delivered from death only to face a different kind of danger. Not from the desert, not from outlaws, but from a man who claimed her as his property, and from a heart that was learning to belong, entirely and irrevocably, to the Apache who had saved her. She clenched the blanket around her, a mixture of fear and longing warring inside her. The canyon had become a battleground not only for survival, but for her heart. And she knew, deep down, that the coming days would demand courage she had never needed before. Courage to fight for freedom, for love, and for a life she could finally call her own. Dawn broke over the canyon with a false serenity. The cliffs glowed orange and red. The spring whispered its constant song, and birds called out from the distant mesquite. To anyone passing from the outside, it looked like peace. But inside Taza's hidden hollow, tension coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Clara awoke to the faint sound of hooves striking rock. Her heart leapt into her throat. She scrambled to her feet, her injury still raw but her spirit hardened. 3 riders appeared, first Whitmore's men, determined, faces twisted in anger and greed. Then, at their lead, a figure on a black stallion. James Whitmore himself, brimming with arrogance and entitlement. "Clara," he shouted, voice slicing through the canyon air. "Return with me. You are mine by law and by promise." Clara's stomach lurched with disgust. She realized he had never cared for her, had never even wanted to know her. He had wanted her as a possession, a display of control. Her body trembled not from fear alone, but from rage. Taza emerged from the shadows, calm, poised, and dangerous. He did not hesitate. He simply stood, letting the attackers see that this canyon was his domain. His presence alone, the steady rise of his chest and the fire in his dark eyes, sent a ripple of unease through Whitmore's men. "You will not take her," Taza said, voice low and steady, carrying across the rocks. "Leave now." Whitmore laughed, cruel and sharp. "You cannot stop me, Apache. She is mine." Taza's hand hovered near the spear he had sharpened days before. The men moved closer, confident, underestimating the warrior who had carried Clara to safety, nursed her wounds, and now stood as her shield. Clara, despite the ache in her ribs, stepped forward. She could not hide. She had learned too much from Taza how to move, how to observe, how to act. She took a small dagger from her belt, the one Taza had shown her how to handle, and held it tightly. "I am not his property," she shouted. "I am not anyone's." Whitmore's face reddened. He drew his own weapon, but Taza moved first. The Apache was a blur, deflecting one of the men's attacks with the spear's shaft, twisting and ducking with supernatural precision. Clara's heart pounded, her fear mingling with exhilaration. One of the men lunged at her. She reacted instinctively, rolling to the side as he swung. Her dagger flashed in the sunlight, slicing his jacket. He stumbled back, and for the first time, she felt not just fear but power. Whitmore saw it all and faltered, anger and disbelief battling on his face. Clara's bravery, combined with Taza's unwavering defense, shocked him. The canyon, a place he assumed he could dominate, became a trap. But then the unexpected happened. A bullet meant for Clara tore through the air. Taza reacted instantly, but the projectile grazed his arm and chest. He stumbled, a grunt escaping him. Clara's heart stopped. "No!" she screamed, running to his side. Adrenaline and fear erased the pain in her own wounds. She pressed her hands to the blood seeping from his shirt, trying to stem it, trembling as she realized how close she had come to losing him. Taza's eyes met hers, dark and intense. Despite the pain, the connection between them deepened. "Clara!" He breathed, voice strained but still calm. "Stay with me, always." The attackers faltered, unnerved by Clara's courage and Taza's lethal precision. They withdrew, retreating into the desert with the knowledge that they could not conquer the canyon or its warrior. When silence finally returned, the canyon seemed impossibly still. The only sounds Clara heard were Taza's labored breathing and the soft gurgle of the spring. She pressed close to him, brushing blood-stained hair from his forehead. "You're alive," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I thought I live because you fight," he said, voice low and rough. "You are strong. You protect yourself, and you protect me." Her fingers trembled as they touched his. In that moment, Clara understood. She was no longer just a helpless bride or a woman saved. She was a partner in survival, a companion in life, and a woman who had dared to face fear and love at the same time. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light over the canyon, Clara realized something profound. The attack had not only tested them, it had bound them. In blood, in bravery, in unspoken trust, their hearts were now inseparable. And the canyon, once a refuge, had become the place where they would fight not just for survival, but for the love neither had expected to find. The canyon was quiet after the attack, but Clara could feel the storm of emotion swirling inside her. She had survived. Taza had survived. And yet the danger had not entirely passed. Whitmore would not give up so easily. He believed Clara was his property. And he would pursue her again. That night, as the fire crackled and the desert wind whispered through the cliffs, Clara sat close to Taza, watching him tend to the bullet wound that still marred his chest. She traced her fingers along the cloth wrapping, careful not to hurt him. Every small movement reminded her that she was no longer helpless, but it also reminded her of how deeply she had come to care for the man who had saved her life, and who had now bled for her. "Taza," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire. He looked up, meeting her eyes with a steady intensity that made her pulse leap. I cannot go back to him. I cannot go back to that life." Taza's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. He had expected this answer, perhaps, but he also understood the weight of her words. Returning to her world, the one outside the canyon, meant returning to a man who would treat her like property, to a life she had never wanted. "You belong here," he finally said, voice low and deliberate, almost like a warning. "With me, safe, protected, and wanted." Clara's heart clenched. "I want that, Taza, more than I ever wanted anything. But I've lived in the world he would pull me back into. I've known fear and helplessness. Can I truly leave that behind?" He reached for her hand, lifting it gently to rest against his chest over his still healing wound. "You choose," he said simply. "But know this, no one will ever harm you here. Not if I can stop it. Not if I must fight every man in the desert." Her chest heaved. She realized that she had already made her choice long before she admitted it aloud. Every instinct, every heartbeat, every moment in the canyon had shown her what love truly was: protection, trust, sacrifice, and a bond neither law nor threat could sever. "I choose you," she said finally, her voice breaking with both relief and fear. "I choose this life, if you'll have me." Taza's eyes softened, the firelight reflecting in them, and he leaned close, brushing his lips against her forehead in a gentle, possessive, yet tender gesture. The contact sent warmth through her entire body, melting the last of the fear that Whitmore's threats had carved into her. "You are mine," Taza murmured. "Not in the way of ownership, but in the way of belonging. Not by law, not by threat, but because we survive together." Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She pressed her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. For the first time since she had been attacked on the road, she felt whole, protected. Love. The decision, though terrifying, liberated her. She was no longer the fragile mail-order bride who had arrived at the edge of the desert. She was Clara Dawson, a woman who had fought, endured, and ultimately chosen a man who would risk everything to keep her alive and safe. Taza held her close through the night, their whispered words and quiet reassurances blending with the wind and the crackle of the fire. In that hidden canyon, surrounded by cliffs that had witnessed countless sunsets, Clara realized something undeniable. The world outside could rage and threaten, but inside these walls, she had found something no one could take from her: love, trust, and a choice of her own making. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the canyon in gold, Clara rose with a renewed sense of purpose. She would not flee, she would not falter, and she would no longer let anyone, least of all Whitmore, determine her fate. She had chosen a man who had already proven his devotion with action, courage, and heart. And now together, they would face whatever the world dared to throw at them. Clara's past, the road, the attack, the groom, was behind her. The canyon, Taza, and the uncertain yet beautiful life ahead were hers to embrace. The canyon awoke in gentle golden light, the cliffs glowing like embers as the sun rose over the desert. For Clara, the world had never seemed more alive or more fragile. In the days since the attack, she had healed not only in body but in spirit. Every scar reminded her of the dangers she had survived, every ache a testament to the strength she had discovered in herself. And yet, none of it compared to the bond she now shared with Taza, the Apache warrior who had saved her life and claimed her heart. Taza moved silently beside her as they walked toward the hidden spring, his presence steady and comforting. His dark eyes, usually so intense, softened as he watched her gather water. For Clara, every glance from him was both reassurance and declaration, a quiet promise that no matter the storms outside, the canyon was their sanctuary. "They will not come again," Taza said, his voice low but unwavering, breaking the morning silence. "Not Whitmore. Not any man who would try to take what is not theirs." Clara nodded. She trusted him completely. She had witnessed his courage, his skill, and the depth of his care. He had defended her with his life, taught her to survive, and shown her the rarest gift a woman could receive in the world. They inhabited the freedom to choose her own destiny. "You've given me more than safety, Taza," she whispered, stepping closer. "You've given me life again." He regarded her, his gaze piercing yet tender. "And you?" "Give me hope," he admitted, the words simple but heavy with truth. "Hope that even after loss, even after pain, one can find love again." Clara reached out, brushing her fingers along his cheek. The warmth of his skin, the steady heartbeat beneath her palm, made her chest swell. "I choose this life," she said, reaffirming what she had whispered in the shadows days before. "I choose you." Not because I must, but because I want to." Taza's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. He took her hand, entwining his fingers with hers, their touch carrying the weight of shared trauma, survival, and burgeoning love. "Then we start again," he said solemnly. Together. The canyon itself seemed to acknowledge the moment. A gentle breeze rustled the sagebrush, and sunlight glittered on the spring as if blessing the bond forming between them. Clara felt a joy she had never known, a joy born not of convenience or obligation, but of connection, trust, and the raw intensity of a love forged in fire and blood. That afternoon, Taza led her to meet his people. Initially wary of the stranger who had appeared wounded and vulnerable in their canyon, the elders soon recognized Clara's courage and determination. She had defended herself, learned the ways of the land, and proven that she was no weak bride to be coddled or controlled. The elders nodded their approval, their respect a quiet affirmation that she had found a place where she belonged. Taza's people welcomed her cautiously, but with warmth, and Clara felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced with her own family or the man she was meant to marry. Here, in the heart of the desert, she was more than a bride, she was a partner, a warrior in her own right, and a woman who had reclaimed her life from fate and fear. As night fell, the canyon bathed in silver moonlight, Clara and Taza sat side by side, sharing a simple meal and the comfort of one another's presence. No words were needed. The silence itself spoke volumes. Every glance, every touch, every shared breath conveyed what they both felt, that despite the violence, the loss, and the hardships of the past, they had discovered something eternal and unshakable. Taza finally took her hand in both of his, raising it to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. "Forever," he whispered, the word carrying the weight of all he had fought for. Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Forever," she echoed. In the canyon of second chances, beneath cliffs that had witnessed centuries of survival, Clara Dawson, the mail-order bride who had once been left bleeding on the road, found her home, her protector, and the man who would love her wholly and fiercely. Together, they faced the future not as prey and protector, not as savior and saved, but as equals bound by courage, trust, and a love that had been forged in the harshest fires of the West. And for the first time in her life, Clara knew that she was exactly where she belonged.